What's the quickest way you've seen a friend fuck up their life? Indian cowhawker with 3 degrees was pushed into a marriage and decided it was better to quit his job and become a bartender, ultimately becoming an alcoholic, all to make himself so undesirable the family no longer wanted him with their daughter. After the marriage was called off, he put his life back on track like nothing happened, and that was that. Got into drugs, got into some debt, was told one day, hey, if you go to this guy's house with us and help us collect on a debt we'll forgive you. They robbed the guy, even though he just was there to look intimidating. He was picked up on felony accessory to armed robbery and served 8 years on a plea deal. Was originally looking at 20. Ruined his future at only 20 years old. One guy I knew had the great idea to drink alcohol and then drive extremely speedy. It ended when his car wrapped itself nicely around a tree. Guy was 19, had massive brain damage afterwards, and lives in a disabled home since then, unable to form proper sentences, walk or do anything. Actually, just don't drink and drive, guys. Got pregnant by a guy who was unable to support them or himself right out of high school. Had the baby, didn't go to college like planned, married loser guy, had a bunch more kids. They live in the trailer park next to her mom. Both work minimum wage retail jobs and struggle to survive. She had a lot of plans to break that cycle. She was the product of it herself. One unexpected pregnancy later, and she's stuck in it and hoping her kids will do better. It's sad to watch. I have a friend who had gotten 2 bachelor's degrees, economics and political science, and wanted to get into politics. He hung around with the same friends from high school, some of which are not very good people. While hanging out with one of them he got drunk and ruined his future. He was arrested for DUI, resisting arrest, and assaulting an officer. He hasn't found full-time employment since. There was this guy I knew for the better part of a decade. He was always the life of the party, but also had his shit together. He had a serious long-term job, while most of us were still college kids. He was the first of my peers to buy a house. He was always in a serious long-term relationship. One day the police show up at his house. They have a search warrant and take all the computers in the house. He rented rooms out to several friends. Turns out he had downloaded a prodigious amount of child pornography onto his girlfriend's laptop. I don't know all the details, but I know he didn't go to prison. His girlfriend dumped him, obviously. He was put on probation, where he couldn't leave the city, so he had to quit his job. He moved out of his own house and into a halfway house. He stopped paying his mortgage, and the house was foreclosed. Auction was just last week. In high school, he was left with a $1.5 million inheritance from his grandmother. He had already secured a scholarship to some prestigious school across the country. All that went down the drain. He stopped going to school, lost his scholarship, bought a house, and partied away most of the rest of the money. Within 6 months he was broke. After another 6 months he had lost the cars, the toys, and the house. My buddy actually bought a jet ski off him for really cheap because he needed money. Last I heard, he was working construction and living in a hotel. Don't trust a 17-year-old kid with $1.5 million. A friend of mine I knew since primary school, UK in the 90s, so about 7 or 8 years old, lost his mother to a sudden and unexpected brain aneurysm when he was 21. She was a single parent with no immediate family, living in a rented house. The only thing he inherited was a second-hand car. Said friend sold said car for a pittance, which he spent on drugs and alcohol within a month. He then, faced with homelessness, moved in with my parents. I'd moved out by this point, where he lied about having a job for another month. When he was found out, waking up afternoon every day for a week was a giveaway. He was asked to leave. He eventually got his life together some years later, but it was a rocky road and a scary reminder of how close a naive young adult can be to destitution. Cousin of mine had never smoked weed before, so he decided to try it for his birthday. Not knowing anything about it, he went out and bought synthetic weed and smoked it by himself. He freaked out and thought he was dying, so he tried to call an ambulance. I'm not sure what happened, but instead of an ambulance a cop showed up, and my cousin got scared and hid. The officer eventually found him, and my cousin proceeded to punch the officer, and was promptly tackled to the ground and arrested. The cop fractured his hand tackling my cousin, so they added that to the charges of assaulting a police officer. Fiance's friend was diagnosed with bipolar. Didn't take his meds. Slept with a woman twice his age who was married but separated. Got her pregnant. She ran back to her husband. Friend doesn't see her after that. He attempts suicide and is given meds at the mental hospital, but stops taking them after release. Next thing we know, the guy is living with a girl he met a week earlier. Marries her a week after that. She's pregnant almost immediately. He moves them to a new city overnight and then back to their hometown when they can't find work on the fly. She gives birth. He works at Walgreens. Less than 6 months later she leaves him with a kid. We don't talk to him anymore, but I think he's on his own still working at Walgreens. Before all this started, he had a full ride to college to study Russian. He turned it down. It's a sad, strange story. A buddy of mine lost his job and girlfriend because he was an idiot, but had inherited income property from his family, so he sat in his 1-bedroom apartment and drank himself to death in about 4 years. I miss him. But he never figured out how to move forward with his life. He was stuck in that high school mentality of, as long as you're cool then everything should work out right. Dumbest bastard I've ever met, but the nicest dude ever. That guy could throw a party with 3 people, and it was great. But no room for him in society and he knew it, and couldn't figure out anything else. I'm pretty confident he let himself go on purpose, so he could always be remembered as the coolest party guy anywhere. A coworker's wife fucked up her life by marrying him. He was close to 30 and she was 17 when they met at a Renaissance fair. Wound up getting married a couple months later. They had to involve her parents since she was underage. The night of their wedding he encouraged her to get it on with his best friend's wife in the backseat of the car while they drove around. The week after she turned 18 he took her to a strip club, and, either that week or the following, he got her to dance in an amateur night competition, which she won. Within a week or so of that she was a full-time stripper. She had multiple girlfriends that she would hang out with. Her husband was fine with this because, as he put it, I provide a different service. She wound up getting addicted to drugs and then selling drugs. They got a divorce. All the above occurred within a 6-month time frame. The girl was several states away from where she had grown up, isolated from any positive influence, and completely dependent on her job as a stripper and her drug dealing coworkers. A friend of mine from high school went to a university where he had quite a bit scholarship money to attend. He was driving on a road trip and got pulled over while a friend and him were hotboxing. They both got arrested and he almost lost all his scholarships. The only reason he didn't was that his friend took all the charges. I'm not against weed, but make sure you know that it can have certain consequences. Very intelligent but very lazy stoner friend of mine. He dropped out of school to basically smoke pot and play video games all day. Lived with his mother in a small apartment where they constantly fought. Miraculously he got a great secure job for life with the post office postal service, but quit after about 2 weeks because he and the boss did not see eye to eye, or some stupid reason like that. This was about 10 years ago. Hasn't had a job since, and has been living off the inheritance his dad left him 2 years ago, but that money is drying up. Army buddy got tricked into thinking his stripper was pregnant after the first night, went and put just her name on the lease of an apartment, and bought her a $70,000 Dodge Challenger. 2 months later it turns out the stripper's kid isn't his. Takes all of his shit. A friend washed out and was cut from the Cincinnati Reds baseball organization, and he was simply crushed. All of his dreams crashed. No one could console him, and he started drinking. His fairly well-off parents died a short time later. He was an only child and ended up inheriting a very sizable amount of money. 6 months later he was found in his apartment. He had drunk himself to death. The 2 huge tragedies in his life, being drafted to play professional baseball and inheriting a ton of money. When I think about him, I both cry about him and I get furious at him. It was all just a mess. We had a friend who was deep in that no girl will want me, I'm happy a virgin forever hole. So we started Operation Get Ron Laid. Well, it was a totally success at a New Year's Eve party. She was kinda odd and pretty ugly, but hey, he knew he could get girls now. By the end of February they were married. By the end of April they had both gained at least 200 pounds, lost their jobs, and last I heard he works part-time at a gas station and they've been trying desperately to have a kid. Bonus, apparently has been miserable the whole time, and stuck with it, because has convinced she's the only home that will want him. He used to be really cool in middle school, to the point where I envied him. He wasn't a popular kid, but he got along with most everybody, got straight A's, and had an awesome family that traveled extensively. There wasn't a single negative aspect to this guy's life. Things changed when we got into 8th grade, however. He started displaying toxic attention-seeking behavior by getting in trouble constantly. There was a point where he got suspended twice in 1 week because he was so disruptive. This was totally out of his character and I realized it, but he was my best friend and I chalked it up to him just being a goof. Middle school ended, and we got into high school, which is where his behavior really started to decline. Instead of hanging out with me or his friend circle that he had built up for years, he wanted to hang out with all the scummy potheads and druggies. His father was a medical marijuana carriage driver, Michigan, so all the broke potheads' eyes lit up at the notion of free and plentiful weed, leading to many fake friends. His attendance at school went from spotty to showing up once a week to not showing up for 4 months. All he did was skip school with his friends and do whatever drugs they could get their hands on. He avoided me, alienated me, and straight up started acting like we hadn't been best friends for 4 years prior. I still tried to keep the friendship and got hurt multiple times in the process. Eventually, he moved away with his family to the middle of nowhere about an hour from me, and he doesn't do anything. He will literally sit in his room all day every day, snorting absurd amounts of Adderall, and never gets off his phone. The few times I went to visit him at his new house, it was like talking to a brick wall. He had changed from a nice young man into a distant apathetic asshole and I couldn't take it. The last time I saw him was about 2 years ago, and I have no plans of seeing him in the future. It's just not worth the effort to try and revive a dead friendship. 1 minute. Girl I went to high school with. She was reasonably drunk at our after prom. Jumped into a car with a guy who was blackout wasted and has swiped his keys back from the party host. He took a curve too wide and drove off a cliff, falling 40 feet into a tree. He broke his neck, got up, and walked home. She went through the windshield. Arms, neck and back broken, face torn to shreds, ear ripped right off. She spent 4 months in a medically induced coma and a year total in that giant halo thing. Severe brain damage. The personality change from that B essentially made her a different person. That was more than 10 years ago, and she is still recovering, and it ruined her chances of a normal life. 1 minute is all it takes sometimes. One of my classmates, but he seemed to have it all. Full ride scholarship, decent paying part-time job at his old high school, super cushy kind of network management job. He was basically getting paid to sit there and study/do schoolwork, doing very well for himself. Then he got caught stealing thousands of dollars of computer equipment from said high school. Lost scholarship, expelled, fired, and charged with grand theft. Gambling addiction. Fruit machines, slot machines. Blew all his salary, hocked himself, maximumed out the cards, the usual. With a colleague, took a client out for lunch, and abandoned both to play the machine he'd spotted in the bar. Our company was offered a free exhibition stand at an event in Northern England, and he was detailed to go up there and man it. He didn't have the money to get there, let alone pay for a night in a hotel, even though he'd get the money back on expenses, so he didn't go. Fired. And it got worse from there. A relative who's been in addiction rehab, it's not all for drugs, people, declared recently that he was glad he only had a coke habit. He reckoned the gambling addicts were the worst of the lot, with the smallest chance of breaking the circle. Bet you they're not, I replied. He did smile, but wanly. I had one who was into ska music, very loyal, good guy. Treated the ladies well, but had that punk mentality. At 14 he discovered pot. Loved to smoke pot, no big deal. Later he started working at the nightclubs, then got a little bit into cocaine for a few years. That was some high roller stuff, but whatever, he could handle it. Then he started hanging with some tweakers and experimented with meth. I know he does it, he's still too ashamed to admit to me that he does it. He owes me and a bunch of our friends money. I honestly was upset, but not enough to burn our friendship. I just want him to quit doing that garbage, but at this point in our lives, the drugs are doing him. He's not doing the drugs. I wish he would just stop messing with that stuff, but what can I do? I can't live his life for him. Getting pregnant because your relationship is falling apart. A baby is not a band-aid, and it will in most cases make your relationship even worse. Only have a child if you and your partner decide that it is something you both want. Women trapping guys with a baby is horrendous. Men lying about using protection to get a girl pregnant is disgusting. She decided to pick party life over school life. What ended up with a kid at the age of 15. From what I know, she couldn't even handle it by herself. Her mom and dad were taking care of the kid while she was constantly going out to party, and right now she has 3 kids and she doesn't even know who is the father of each one. She wasn't raped, she was just going dead drunk to bed with strangers. Happening right now actually to a coworker of mine. She has a BF with a really well-paying job, but thinks it's a good idea to sleep with our customer service supervisor. Now this girl literally has nothing without her BF paying for it. No house, no car, no phone, I mean nothing. Why she thinks she's gonna end up better I don't know. Our supervisor makes far less than the BF and this girl has gotten used to pricey items and being treated like royalty. So my co-workers and I are basically sitting back and waiting till it'll blow up in their faces. We give it till holiday season for it to boil over. Had a friend in high school who smoked weed all day every day, even in our school locker room. He was an absolute mess. Got caught, ratted out everyone at our school, caused a huge drug bust, and was hated by everyone for the rest of high school. He lost his scholarship and he might have gotten rejected from college too.